Welcome to Enviro Close-Up. I am Carl Grossman. With me is John O'Conner, and he is the co-author of a critical new book, Who Owns the Sun? The book is about the lost opportunities to implement the great promise of solar power, solar energy. John, what happened 20, 25 years ago? Everybody was talking, a lot of talk about the great potential of solar energy.
Well, Carl, as you might remember, 20 years ago, we heard President Nixon talk about we've got to get away from Middle Eastern oil. He declared energy independence. Within 5 or 6 years later, we had Jimmy Carter in there saying that energy independence was the moral equivalency of war. Those early presidents realized that, in fact, we have this great opportunity, still have this great opportunity of harvesting the rays of the sun, turning it directly into heat, electricity, turning the wind into electricity, using the ground below our feet. You know, we have temperatures year-round in the ground that are 50 degrees. You bring that temperature into your building, it's great. You know, air conditioning in the summer, great basis of creating the heat in a building in the winter. So we know that we have the technologies already available to get most of our energy needs directly from nature, directly from the wind, the sun, and the ground below our feet. The real hard question is not how do we harvest the sun, but rather how do we generate the people power to break the grip that these huge utility and oil companies have over our sacred democracy. Because what we've seen is that while the technology is available, when Exxon goes into Congress and spreads all that money around, of course, and it comes up for votes in Congress, you don't see a lot of the senators or U.S. reps actually voting for the appropriate level of research and dollars that we need to kind of jumpstart these technologies. These technologies are ready, but really it's been the politics of the last 20 years that has buried solar technology.
One of the points you make in the book has to do with private ownership of those who produce energy in this country. I mean, what you argue is that solar power must be brought through public power. Can you explain?
Well, basically, you know, we think that if you take a hard look at our utility structure, most of our energy right now comes from privately owned utilities. But a good, healthy portion, about 20%, comes from publicly owned utilities. And it's no surprise that the publicly owned utilities produce electricity 15 or 20% cheaper than privately owned utilities. You know, whether you're in California with Pacific Gas and Electric, or at Long Island, you know, with was it Lilco down there, and or you're up here in Boston with Boston Edison. All these great metropolitan areas have sister cities that have publicly owned utilities, and you do a price comparison, publicly owned power is a lot cheaper. It's also the case that if you're a publicly owned utility, there's no incentive to necessarily make more electricity from your coal-fired plant or your oil-fired plant or your nuclear-fired plant. There's actually an incentive to conserve electricity, have less of it coming from utilities, have more and more of it coming from people's backyards or rooftops and the like. So we've noticed that privately owned utilities don't have an incentive to conserve, don't have an incentive to kind of undersell their largest product, and a privately owned firm's strategy to make more money is to grow more electricity from their centrally located power plants. Publicly owned utilities, like we have a great example in the book, the Sacramento Municipal Utility District, which used to own a nuclear power plant. Everybody said up there, well, if we close the nuke, we'll never be able to get enough electricity. Of course, they closed the nuke. They put in a gas-fired turbine, but at the same time, they instituted photovoltaic arrays, which is a panel you put on your roof that turns sunlight directly into electricity. They put solar hot water heaters on rooftops. In Sacramento, they did tree plantings, because if you have trees alongside your house, your electricity bill's like 10 or 15% lower in the summer from not having to use as much energy to get your air conditioning going. So we know that the technology is available, but it's really been very hard-nosed political decisions that have put solar technology on the shelf. This book speaks to a brighter future where we can say, okay, these are the things we need to do to get solar off the shelf and back into practice. Looking at things like publicly owned utility versus privately owned utility obviously is one vehicle, but there's a lot homeowners can do to actually get panels on their roof today and not have to pay hundreds of dollars down the road to local utility companies.
Who Owns the Sun begins with a rather strong foreword, as you could expect from Ralph Nader, who describes how people action, people power, is very much necessary to get solar power moving again. John, what can people do?
I tell you, one of the main things we got to do is we got to take back our democracy. Basically, solar technology is not in place today because over the last 20 years, the utility companies, the big oil companies have really given us the best Congress money can buy. They've put millions of dollars into ensuring that, you know, the oil guys get their way when, in fact, greater health, greater wealth, more jobs, more freedom is associated with moving away from Arab oil. And I think that's a key thing. We've got to take big money out of politics, big corporations out of politics. As wonderful as you and I are, when we call a U.S. Senator, we don't quite get the response as the guy who heads up Exxon, and subsequently they have a lot more influence. So we got to take back our sacred democracy. Having said that, we've got to develop a credit infrastructure to allow the average citizen to get a loan, to be able to pay for their solar devices, their wind devices, their wells in the backyard that can bring up the 50-degree temperature that can AC or heat our homes in the winter or summer. We need that credit infrastructure because that's really the missing piece to allowing the average homeowner to think, yeah, hey, solar's great, but it's going to cost me $10,000. $10,000 makes sense if you get a 20 or 30-year note that, you know, essentially lowers your electric or gas bill by maybe $15, $20 a month. So there is cheaper energy available, cleaner energy available, but it's got to take a citizen movement to both take back our Congress and at the same time tell our Congress that we need a credit infrastructure to get the job done.
And not just loans, tax credits. I mean, it wasn't too long ago that if you did solar, if you did wind, you could take a little bit off your income tax because it was in the national interest for people to go to alternative energy.
That's right. One of the first things the Reagan administration did was to get rid of those federal tax credits. So if you spend a couple $1,000s, you get that knocked off your federal income tax, and that has been abolished. We need to bring back those tax credits. We need a loan program to jumpstart these technologies because they are available. They are now cost competitive, and perhaps most importantly, they are the thing that's going to both save our environment and put America back to work.
The book is Who Owns the Sun? People, Politics, and the Struggle for a Solar Economy, a struggle which is continuing. And if you'd like to get a copy of the book, number is 1-800-639-4099. That's 1-800-639-4099. Actually, perhaps could be subtitled, Who Owns the Sun? Who Owns America? Because unless the people get back, as you argue, and I think a lot of people feel, get back this country, get back control of this country, you're not going to be able to take advantage of such a plentiful, well, as somebody said, the problem with solar energy, it's for free.
Well, I think that's the key point, democracy. We have a nation that was dedicated to certain principles. Amongst those principles is that we as a country are supposed to determine our own fate. It's hard to do if your energy dollars are going to people who don't care about our country.
Who Owns the Sun? Thank you, John O'Conner.
Thank you, Carl.
Thanks for Dan Berman working with John O'Conner on this fine book. Thank you for watching.